Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 22. Today in the show, we're joined by Steve Bartylla, accomplished outdoor writer and veteran deer hunter, and we're diving into the details of patterning mature bucks. You are not going to want to miss this one, so settle in and let's go. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. Today is a great day because fall is finally here. And joining me and Dan today on the show is a great guest, Steve Bartylla. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey, thanks, guys. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you on the show as well. And how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing real good. Real good. As you said, I'm probably in the minority in this. I almost wish fall was a couple more weeks away yet myself because I got so much stuff left to do to get ready. But it is, I'll tell you what, if you're a deer hunter and you can't get excited about this time of year, there's something wrong.
This is definitely that exciting time of year. I can relate, though, to what you said about kind of wishing you had some more time. I spent this whole past weekend running around like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to get all my final stand prep done, trim out all my final shooting lanes and whatnot. And I think, knock on wood, I'm ready. But it always seems like there's...
I'm envious, buddy. I've got I'm embarrassed to admit this, but with all the extra work I've had this year, I've got over 150 tree stands out, and not one of them's ready to go.
Wow.
I've got somewhere over 150 trees to climb yet, and time's running.
Yeah, I guess I do not envy you on that workload right there.
Oh, the legs are going to be sore.
I imagine. I think that's a perfect segue, too, to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, Steve. For those who are listening to that maybe aren't as familiar with you and your work, could you share with us just a little bit about your background, what exactly you're doing in the outdoor and hunting industry today that might be why you have 150 tree stands to hang?
I do. I don't know exactly how to put this. I learned early on that if my primary bread and butter is as an outdoor writer, but frankly, to do that full time, you can't afford to starve the kids. There's only, especially in my niche, is all how-to. There's only so much how-to stuff to write, and there's only so much demand out there for it. It's decent pay per assignment, but to try to make a living off of just that, you really can't. So I do I've got a tip segment on every episode of Deer and Deer Hunting's television show, and also do a bunch of interviews. They actually have 3 different television shows. Do a bunch of interviews for those shows, and then also work as a consultant, where I have, it changes, but it's almost always either 4 or 5 properties that I have long-term management responsibilities on, where these guys pay me to come in and do all the habitat improvement and food plot and stand setup type work, and then actually come up with hit lists of bucks that I believe they should kill, and as important, if not more so, please don't kill this one. He is a fantastic, he's a 130-inch, 2.5-year-old that's got unlimited potential written all over him. And then taking it a final step for those guys, it's, okay, where should we hunt tonight, Steve? All right, this is the buck you want to kill. This is how I think you should go about doing it. Now, ultimately, they're the owners. They can do whatever they want, but they actually are pretty darn good, great guys. And what I'll do for the most part there is work on a property for I tell the owners it'll take me about 5 years. It'll take me about 5 years to get everything set up to the point where I believe it's just a self-sustaining machine at this point. And then go ahead and on some of them, at that point, we part ways, and I go start over on a new one.
Wow. As much as I like killing deer, I think the stuff that you're doing is what I find is the most fun. So that sounds like a good deal.
Well, and talk about, it gives me opportunities that I would never, ever, ever have on my own. I mean, the most land I've ever owned in my life was a 40-acre piece of ground that I lived on for a while. And now I'm talking about having clients that have, some of them are just your average-sized farms. But also at the same time right now, one of the properties I'm managing is 1,550 contiguous acres.
Jeez.
Yeah. You know, I mean, the amount of, I mean, I almost feel like I should be paying, well, I would pay people to be willing to do this kind of stuff.
Hey, don't cut yourself short.
Yeah, exactly.
Your customers might hear this.
Well, it's not much of a secret with them because they all end up becoming friends over time, and I've pretty much told them flat out that thank you guys.
Right.
the amount of stuff I've been able to learn running, and I mean, these guys obviously, if you have 1,550 acres, you got pretty deep pockets. Okay. So, I mean, geez, I'm running 40 different trail cameras, all Reconics trail cameras on this property. And to be able to have, there was another 4,000 acre property that I worked on about 8 years ago I finally finished up on. To be able to track individual buck movements across that 4,000 acres, you talk about an eye-opener.
Wow.
And that has helped me. As I said, I should be paying them to be able to do this type of stuff. It's beyond fascinating.
That sounds very cool.
And to answer your question, I agree. To me, this is, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love killing stuff as much as the next guy. But that aspect of stuff is a thrill. You know, just absolute thrill to be able to manage ground that I could never have in my wildest dreams.
I think those experiences that you've just described that you've had, given the ability to monitor and learn about these deer on all these different properties, is a big part of what we want to talk about today, because I want to focus on patterning mature bucks. How you can observe and collect data and information to pattern a deer as best as possible. So that's our main focus today. But before we dive into that, we always do like to kick off the show with a little bit of fun, a little lighter topic question. And so, Dan, I think you had something for Steve that you wanted to ask him.
Yeah, I tell you what. And what made me think about this today was I drove all the way to work, and my wife texted me that my coffee was still on the counter. So my question to you, have you ever pulled a bonehead move and got all the way up in your tree, or can you provide us with a short story of a time you've gotten all the way up into the tree and then forgot a key piece of equipment?
I'm actually having a hard time thinking of getting up in the tree and forgetting a key piece, but what I have, there was a piece of ground that I live in central Wisconsin. There was a piece of ground that I used to manage in southwestern Minnesota that was about just over a 2-hour drive there. And I thought it was awesome because I could drive there, and most people are going to think I'm nuts, but I could drive there, hunt the afternoon, and drive back home and sleep at home and get up with the kids the next morning. It's really disheartening when you make that drive and realize you didn't bring your bow.
Oh, no.
You know, that is, and I only did it once, but wow, did I ever remember that.
So what did you do when you got there and realized I don't have my bow?
I turned around and drove home.
That's a tough pill
but it
to swallow.
It was a beautiful drive.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I wasn't upset driving home at all. It was just I was happy and singing the local rock music station, and yeah, just a great mood. Great mood out the drive.
I bet. How about you, Dan? Have you pulled a bonehead move before?
Dude, I pull a bonehead move I'm just so excited. My mind is thinking, okay, am I going to see this buck tonight? I got to keep an eye out for all my, I know that historically there's a rub or a scrape here. I'll probably, I got to avoid leaving scent in that area, blah, blah, blah. And then I get up, I get to the tree, and my mind isn't what I should be doing, but on what events might happen that night. And I've left my bow or my harness back in the truck. I've set up a tree stand in a tree that earlier that summer I trimmed it out. I got all the way up into the tree, and I'm like, man, it doesn't look like I trimmed out this at all. And I look over to a tree to the next to me, and there's my bow hooks from the summer where I was one tree over. Is where I trimmed that tree out and I set up on the other one.
Well, if you want to talk bonehead moves like that, I mean, man, I can talk. The buck. I'll spare you the entire story because I tried to write it a couple days after I was done. It came in at over 7,000 words.
Ooh, yeah, that's a doozy.
To put it in perspective, long articles are 2,500.
Yeah.
But here you got Mr. How-To Expert, and oh man, I got this figured out. There's this food plot. I got picture after picture of the 6.5-year-old buck that I've tracked since he was 3.5, and man, he's killable. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to kill him, but I'm so smart, I'm going to walk down the creek. Because from the creek, they won't be able to see me on the now bare ridge. If I walk through the food plot, I'll stick out like a turd in a punch bowl, and I get about 30 yards down that, and all of a sudden the water runs out, and it's nothing but about 2 feet deep worth of cottonwood leaves.
Ooh.
Wow, are they loud. And every step is just... And so I got to get out of here. Might as well walk through the food plot now because every deer up there knows. Go to the stand I wanted to hunt. I'd prepped it early in the year. I'd hunted it one time, climb up in the stand, and whoa, do you ever stick out like a turd in a punch bowl now that all these leaves are gone? And you aren't going to be able to, the way I've got it positioned, I'm not, and I got no one to every stand I ever hunt. I end up scouting and hanging myself, so I got no one to blame but myself here. You know what, if it's before 3 o'clock, I'm getting down, moving to the other stand, it's 3:30, forget it, I'm going. Now, go over to the other one, and I mean, just one mishap after another, and somehow ended up accidentally killing him.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. I should have killed him 3 times, but the first 2 times I messed up.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care who you are. If you do this stuff enough, you're going to make yourself look like a silly school kid. And anybody who says they don't, they either have too much ego, they don't hunt much, or they're just flat out BSing you.
Yep. There's a lot of truth to that. Deer definitely have a way of making us look stupid. Yeah. That's the truth. I don't know if I've got a story as good as either one of yours. I did have a little bit of a bad spell last year. At the beginning of last season, I had a hunt. I went out to a new property, got all the way out there, got into my tree stand, and I film all my hunts, as you know, as Dan, as you know. And I got out there, and I had forgotten my camera arm, or the fluid head for the camera arm. So I ended up using a bunch of twine to somehow attach the camera arm to the bottom of the arm, and then had it swinging there, just kind of somehow to keep it horizontally level. But it was pretty awful. And then the next hunt out, this time I didn't forget my camera arm. I forgot my camera. And so then I got to my stand before I figured that. I had to run. I literally kind of scurried around this corn edge all the way back to my truck, got a camera out of there, got back to the stand, and like 15 minutes later, I did have a 150-inch 4 or 5-year-old buck come strolling by my way. So that was pretty cool. Made it back just in time for him to start moving. But haven't forgot a bow yet, so I'm doing okay.
Knock on wood, my friend.
Yeah, true. Knock on wood.
Give it time. Time.
Yeah. So with our bonehead stories out of the way, then let's bring it back to our main topic, which is patterning bucks. Man, as we alluded to earlier, with all of your experience, Steve, with tracking all these deer and thousands of acres and probably thousands of trail camera pictures and all the observations and hunts and different pieces of data you've been able to collect, I think you've got some really interesting insight into how you can pattern a mature deer. And so, with that said, I was hoping to kick things off, if you could please explain to us, in your opinion, when you say pattern a deer, what do you mean? What does that mean to you?
I was really hoping you were going to ask that question. And if you hadn't, I would have derailed the conversation and probably given you the answer anyway, in my opinion. In my opinion, there's so much I hope you don't mind me being blunt, but flat out baloney when it comes to patterning bucks out there, that it's beyond ridiculous. When I first started, a huge eye-opener for me was when I first started doing the consulting thing, probably, 25-ish years ago. I did a lot of consulting for outfitters. And here you go ahead and you lay out all this stuff, and then, Mr. Joe TV star, and I'm not trying to rip on the TV guys, as I said already. I don't do a lot of filmed hunts, but do a lot of TV stuff myself, and they're great guys. But next thing you know, Joe TV star comes out there and he kills a buck out of one of those stands, and then you see it on TV. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea he knew so much about that property and that buck that he'd never seen before. And there's a great way to build cred in this industry is to pretend you did a lot more than you really did.
Uh-huh.
I think most people see through it eventually, but the only reason I'm jumping on the soapbox for a second is the danger to this is your average hunters believe it. And it's not even so much that they believe it, it's that they start questioning, well, how come I can't do that?
Mm-hmm.
There is so much going on out there in the fall, it's not funny. You've got food sources changing very dynamically. You've got food sources that are plummeting. You got such as, you get a handful of frost, that alfalfa field no longer is as good. Or you talk about the Northwoods, the aspen leaves fall. Those aspen leaves are a huge food source before they drop. You got all these food sources going under, and you got acorns, mast, hard and soft, corn, soybeans. They went through that drying period, and now they're edible again. And so you got the food sources changing, and then you look at the rut cycle. So much is changing through each rut cycle that the idea of getting on that buck and knowing what he's doing throughout the entire season, if you can do that outside of a pen, you're doing a lot better than I can. And at the same time, even when those quote-unquote patterns are pretty stable, most bucks don't have just one bedding area. Most bucks don't have just one food source. So there's no guarantee that you're going to end up being able to, he's bedding here, he's traveling through there, he's feeding there. To me, patterning a whitetail is nothing more than knowing one thing he tends to do during legal shooting light. If you know that one thing, all of a sudden now you got a chance to kill him. But oftentimes, I don't know exactly where he's bedding. I've got a pretty good idea he's bedding in this area over here. But where exactly he's bedding there, I couldn't tell you. And to get that level of intel, you'd have to be so incredibly intrusive that he's not going to keep those patterns anyway because you just booted them out of there.
Right.
So what I look for is nothing more than that one thing he does somewhat consistently during daylight. And then I try to put the rest together. I try to put it together because if I can figure out where he's bedding, if he's not, or here's where it comes in real handy. He's hitting this food source. He's hitting this food source on average half hour after dark. If I can figure out where he's coming from, I should be able to find a spot between his bedding area and that food source that I can go ahead and set up on him. But for the love of pepperoni pizza, when you find that one kink in his armor, jump on it. Jump on it now because patterns are not stable throughout the entire season. Food sources are going to change on you. The rut cycle is going to have, all of a sudden, that alfalfa field or that clear-cut regrowth isn't anywhere near as interesting to him once the does start coming into estrus. At that point, his priority then is does. Right before that, you've got scrapes. I want to communicate scrapes and knocking out that position he's in the buck hierarchy. is very important to him, and that's going to be one of his top priorities, and that's going to mess up his, if he ever even had it, clockwork feeding patterns. So I think one of the most important things to realize is, no, you're not going to figure out everything that buck does 24/7. 2, once you figure out a kink in his armor, jump on it, because you don't know how long that's going to last. The one other thing I would say about patterning deer right off the top is gauge the amount of pressure the area receives. That can be huge. On the surface, this may seem like a bit of an oxymoron, but I spend about 25% of each season hunting public ground. Okay? And another 25% is hunting, just what I consider normal ground, small farms that numerous people have access to. The other 50%, I hunt utopia. Okay? But the heavier the pressure, in general, the more reliable those patterns are. Because that buck has actually found that spot within that heavy pressure area where he feels safe during daylight. He doesn't want to leave it. So he is actually more of the exception to the rule when it comes to patterning deer, that he tends to be much more consistent. If you find that, to me, the secret to getting off on a tangent, the secret to hunting heavily pressured deer, public land deer, is find those pockets where no one else are going. And they almost all, well, I shouldn't say that, in a surprisingly high percent of land, they exist. It's the other side of that swamp, so I got to slap on some hip boots. It's that deep, nasty gorge that nobody wants to cross. And you get up in northern Wisconsin or northern Minnesota or UP of Michigan, it's going that extra mile back in. Or the other scenario, the buck I killed in Wisconsin just 2 years ago, just some little tiny pocket of cover right next to the road while everybody else is heading to the bigger woods. But that's how, in my opinion, the bucks survive to become mature in those settings. They find those spots where other people aren't going. When they find them, they relate, my experience has been they relate very heavily to that location. Getting them to leave there by their own free will doesn't happen often during daylight. Because of that, their patterns tend to be much more consistent.
All right, so
I kind of sort of almost answered your question, I think, somewhere in all that.
All right, so to elaborate on what you've just said about, anything within killable daylight, whether it's a trail camera picture or, you've seen them from a different tree stand. If let's say you have a trail camera picture and it's 2 hours after dark, but he's consistently at that spot 2 hours after dark. What are you doing? Any type of, hypothesizing of where he's coming from, where he's going, and adjusting your hunting towards that? Or are you just kind of staying away from that area until there is daylight activity?
It depends on what I believe the scenario is. Take a buck that I killed off of another, it's just a small average 100-acre property here in Wisconsin last year. You're describing to a T what I had. It's surrounded completely by meat hunters. God love them. There's nothing wrong with that. And public land. Okay. I believed that he was bedding. I knew that he was bedding on this point that was, only about 100 yards away from this little food plot I had. Yes, I do go ahead and I hypothesize on where do I believe he's coming from. Okay. If I don't think I know, a really cool little trick is to try to get his track. So let's say you get a real good example. Let's say you get his track on the edge of a corn, soybean, or fresh clear cut. Okay, when you've got your scouting camera out there, you measure that track. You measure its length, its width. You got his fingerprint. Now, granted, all four hooves aren't going to be identical. but they're going to be close enough that you got a pretty darn good idea. Okay, so now I know he's feeding in the soybean, corn, or clear cut. Okay. I don't know where he's coming from, though. From the trail camera picture, let's say I have got him, for one thing, seeing a mature buck do something once is not a pattern. I need to see it at least twice. Okay, but okay, I've got his picture here a couple times. I know he's feeding here. Where's he coming from? Well, okay, he's getting here an hour after dark. He's approaching each time from the right. That means he's coming somewhere from over in that direction. Well, I'm going to go out there. If I don't have a pretty good idea already where he's coming from, I'll go out there midday wearing rubber boots, treated clothing, with a garden rake. And every one of those trails are entering that clear cut or bean field or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and rake about a 3-foot section of dirt. And I will, as long as it's not too far back in, I'm going to go to where those trails split. And I'll rake one on each of those as well, right up from the split. Now you go ahead and you give it anywhere from a couple days to a week. You come back with a stand on your back, and you let what I call track catchers tell you where he's coming from and set up and hunt right there on the spot.
Steve, is that something that you can pull off even on heavily pressured land? Going in there a time or two extra to put down that track catcher, or is that something that you're typically seeing working better in the lower pressure situations?
Heavily pressured land, I am all about doing absolutely nothing to draw any attention to me whatsoever. If I can find that pocket, I got a good chance of killing that deer. Okay. Because in most settings, some areas, as I said, you talk in northern Wisconsin, big woods settings, I'd be more than happy to try that. But in more your normal normal hunting public land situations, I'd really rather not, because they don't have the habitat out there. But now again, it depends. I love it. I hope there's a ton of big buck sign outside of that little pocket that he's living in. Okay? Because those are the areas everybody else is hunting. And every time he decides to make a scrape, freshen up that scrape, or make another rub at 4 o'clock in the morning, that's awesome, because the guys who are hunting there, they're reinvigorated. Today's going to be the day I'm going to see him. If I can't find that pocket that he's living in those situations, I wouldn't hesitate to do that. But once I find that pocket that's undisturbed, it's either, as I said, either so thick and nasty or a massive, massive pain to get to. At that point, in my mind, I got what I need. I know he's in this pocket. They're generally not huge. It's impossible to come up with an average on this, but if I had to say, I'd say they're an average of, if you can find a 50-acre pocket that's undisturbed, you're doing good. Usually it's far less than that. It's right. Well, the one that I killed, the one out of that when I was telling you, it was just a little pocket right next to the road. Heck, that was 2 acres of ground. You're not going to be able to get away with something like that there, obviously.
Sure.
I'm talking more. I use this technique more on the moderate to low pressure situations.
Okay. So taking a step back, as I see it, and correct me if there's something additional we need to add to this, but as I understand it and as I've seen, it seems to be that there's 3 major tools you can use to help develop some kind of pattern on a deer. That being, actual observation data, whether that be from the stand or scouting from a distance or something, trail cameras, or on-the-ground sign, like you mentioned, tracks, scrapes, rubs, etc. So my question for you is, first, is there any other tool or factor that you're using to pattern deer? I guess that's my first question. Is there anything else?
In a weird way, I'm going to say yes. And that is one of the things that really, really, really helped me is, and I still do it to this day, and I'm still learning to this day. If it ever gets to the point where I think I know it all, I hope somebody slaps me, because I've gotten stupid, is during the off season, when I find that buck's bed, I go ahead and I hunker down, and I don't lay down, I squat down. And I look around, why is that buck bedding in this one location here? Now, what makes this spot one of the spots where he feels safe enough to lay down on? And you do that enough when you start getting a feel. It doesn't take long for you to learn that, oh, geez, bucks really like bedding on knobs off of ridges and, just on what's called around the military crest of a ridge where it really starts dropping off hard. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're looking at any type of wetlands, if there's any type of a peninsula dry land that goes into that swamp, real good chance he's bedding on the end of that. If there's islands out in that swamp, real good chance he's bedding there. Okay, so you're dealing with a flat bigwood setting. Okay, you don't have an area without squat for swamps and doesn't have any terrain. Well, where's that 5, 6, 7-year-old clear cut that's growing up all thick and nasty? As chances are in that setting, he's bedded in the nastiest stuff, thickest stuff he can find. So part of it is just always, and I mentioned, we did that other interview the other day, and I mentioned this in there, always ask why. Don't be content with just finding deer sign. Ask why they made it there. What's the motivation? What's the odds of it happening again? Where's he coming from? Where's he going to? The more of that stuff you generate over the year, you almost build a database of experiences that you can then start to apply to other locations. But so part of it's just intuitive. You get a feel for it after. The more you do anything, the better of a feel you get for it. And the rest, though, is, I'll tell you what, trail cameras are tough to beat. Trail cameras and observations.
Yeah.
Now, deer sign helps a lot too, especially deer tracks. Those track catchers are beautiful. I use them a lot. They are a great tool. Perhaps the most ignored bit of sign left out in the woods are deer tracks. And they'll tell you, especially in snow, they'll tell you exactly where he was coming from and exactly where he's going to.
I think you're right, too. That's something that doesn't get a whole lot of play in the media or when people are talking about, how to understand deer. The tracks are kind of one of those underlooked pieces of the puzzle. And I want to dive a little deeper into that and some of your other thoughts on sign. But first, I want to focus on what you just said before that, and that being the power of trail cameras. Can you give us some real meaty detail on how you're specifically using trail cameras to try to figure out these specific deer, whether it be for your clients or for yourself? Where are you putting those cameras at certain times of the year? How often are you checking them? What are your real goals there with that?
Well, for clients, my goals are twofold. I need an inventory of what they got out there, and I need to hopefully get enough information. And I'm not saying I pull this off every time, but hopefully enough information that if they want to kill that deer, I can at least put them in the ballpark. The stand that I've got up over here with this wind under these conditions, that's from what I can gather, your highest odds location. And I am going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here for a second, and that is everything's tendencies. There just plain are not these cut and dried rules of deer behavior. If they exist, I don't know what they are. Now, the best we can hope for is he tends to do this under these circumstances. But by definition, a tendency means there's plenty of times he doesn't.
Right.
And frankly, I think that's part of the fun. If they did everything that we believe they're supposed to under each condition, well, what's the thrill? But so the two biggest things I'm using trail cameras for are an inventory. I need to know what's out there, and then to try to zero in a little bit more on where he is. My first golden rule, and this was I've been using this is going to date me here, but I've been using trail cameras all the way since when Trailmaster first came out. I don't blame you guys if you have no clue what I'm talking about, but it was a transmitter and a receiver and a camera.
Wow.
You actually had 3 different units that you had to set up in order to be able to get a picture of a deer. I learned the hard way that your number one golden rule when it comes to trail cameras is do no harm. These things are supposed to help you.
Yeah.
So I can't say I never do, but the overwhelming majority of the cameras that I use are in very low impact locations. Frankly, when it comes to the public land hunting, I almost never put a trail camera out there. No, almost never. Just mainly by default because I don't want any more disturbance than I can. I need to minimize my disturbances to the maximum, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
And going out there to check trail cameras, hey, first you got the risk of them getting stolen, obviously, on public ground, and then even more importantly, I'm making a disturbance every single time I go out there, especially if I'm going to get to a spot where I believe he's going to be active. So on that ground, it's all sign. It's all try to find that location no one else is going to, and then look for some big tracks or big rubs, or even small rubs that are just the trees just trashed. I know I'm dealing with a mature buck here. On public lands, my goal is a 3.5 or better. I don't even care what that 3.5-year-old looks like. If it's a 100-inch 3.5-year-old, I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to be proud as heck.
Yeah.
Because he was tougher than that 160-incher I killed on that 2,000-acre piece of ground that only had 10 hunters the entire year, and it's been managed for 5 years. But so I'm not using trail cameras in those situations. On the average to low pressure ground, I am using them, and my number one rule is low impact. Now everybody talks about the cool, low impact is the cool term these days, but few people actually ever go into any detail on what low impact is. They can't see you, they can't smell you, they can't hear you. If I can consistently get in and out without one of those three things happening, it's a low impact location. And that every bit as important getting in and out without them seeing, smelling, or hearing me. Okay, so right off the top, I'm not going to say I never do any higher impact locations, because quite honestly I do. But it's for professional reasons.
Sure.
If I'm 100% for hunting, it's going to be someplace I can get in and out. Really cool little trick that I've been using lately is picture about a 5-acre inlet going into the woods. Now you got a big field out here, and here's this little inlet of field that goes in, sucks up into the woods a while.
Okay.
Well, go ahead and put that back 1/2 acre or so into clover. And then put the rest of that inlet into corn. Then have soybeans out on the main field. Now, obviously, these aren't all my crops. Now, I've just worked with the farmer to have this set up. Okay? Then go ahead and make a little ATV trail, going from the soybeans back to the clover. You're going to catch every single deer that's going between the clover and the soybeans on that trail, and you can set that camera right out on the main field. Now, granted, you're not going to be getting those buck pictures most often till after dark, but you know what? They're wasting time back in that little inlet back there, and you have natural screening, and they feel safe as if they're in the middle of the woods. But that's a great little trick that when I have that level of control, that I use a lot. A trail through the corn, or actually what it is it's along the edge of the woods, where you take down about one row of corn, really gets those deer to use that like crazy. But what I'm doing is I'm setting them up at what I view as all my high odds, low impact locations. Another great trick for relatively young clear cuts, meadows, or fields that are too big to cover, or you don't have that great spot to set up a cam, set up on last year's scrapes. And I'm talking this time of year.
Yeah.
I get a ton of pictures of, nothing like you get that last week of October. But I get a ton of velvet pictures every year of bucks working scrapes. And what you're looking for, you're looking for that licking branch that serves as a communication hub year-round, which tends to be one or several of the most heavily used scrapes in the area. When you don't have that, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I really like to use young oaks for this because they'll last me for 4 years. But go ahead and cut a tree down, about with a diameter anywhere from a soda to a coffee can diameter. That I'm going to go ahead and plant 20 yards out into that opening, right in front of my camera, which happens to be right in front of my stand.
That brings up sorry, Steve. One quick follow-up question. What you're saying there? You mentioned putting these fake scrape trees in front of your camera, which is in front of your stand. And my question to you, and this is something I'm always questioning when I'm out setting my cameras and whatnot, is how the presence of a camera, even if you're not going and checking it all the time, but just purely the presence of that camera might affect deer and possibly spook them. Are you concerned at all about spooking deer just with the pure presence of a camera there and the flash or the infrared glow or anything like that?
It depends 100% on what kind of camera I'm using. That's where it's really nice to be spoiled and have rich clients. Because on those Hyperfire Reconic 600s and hopefully on the new ones as well, I'm not worried about it one bit. Okay. With a flash camera, though, or what's even more important, you can debate flash, either side of flash all day long. And I believe that my own personal opinion is that the majority of deer don't care. Well, if the minority happens to be the buck you want to kill, you really don't care if the majority of them don't care. But camera noise is the killer. You'll get a lot of deer that are very accepting of a flash, but if they hear that whir click of a camera coming out of sleep mode, they don't much care for that. What I used to do, I'll be honest with you, I don't use them anymore, but what I used to do with cameras like that I found that worked for me was go ahead and set them in a single shot mode and set them at least 7 feet off the ground. So now they're angled down to what you're trying to cover, and you got one shot that's done. Doing that, I can't honestly say I know I spooked any deer. The other thing I should say is the times that I set cameras by stands are actually in the minority. Okay, it's only on those really low impact, right on the edge of a field type situations, because otherwise, and deer, I don't know how much more of a tangent I should get off on here, but deer have different tolerance levels in different areas. They'll tolerate a decent amount of human disturbances around a field edge because they're used to it. The farmer's going through there checking his crops. He's out there spreading manure on his alfalfa field. He's doing all this stuff. They're used to disturbances there. You start getting back in the woods, and all of a sudden their tolerance for disturbances start to plummet. Okay, so on a field edge, I'm willing to have a camera right next to my tree stand. I almost never do if it's not on the edge of a field. And one other thing I'm going to mention quick on a tangent here, if you don't mind, is on those cameras that have flash or make noise, you can use them to actually help focus deer activity around your stand. I've yet to spook a deer to the point where they leave this area. Okay. What they'll do, though, often is they'll avoid that camera location. So you're covering let's say a pinch in the field that's 70 yards wide. I don't know about you guys, but I ain't taking a 70-yard bow shot.
Nope.
But what I'll often do is I'll go ahead and set one of the older Reconixes that I use, that have the red glow on the other side of that. And the deer still go through that neck, only now they cheat over towards me. That works. That's a nice little trick that you're not going to use often, but when you use and it works out, you're real happy and you think you're all sorts of smart.
That's a neat idea.
But anyway, I'm sorry I can't even, at this point, I can't even remember what your question was, so hopefully somewhere in there. If you can't tell, I tend to get off on tangents.
It's good stuff. I'm fine with the tangents. These are some fascinating topics we're talking through here. Dan, what are you thinking about all this?
Yeah, I like the little tips and tricks as far as using. I really like I know another guy who uses. You mentioned about like basically cutting down a tree and burying it vertically in front of your stand. I know a guy who does that. Basically, he makes a horse. Where you tie up horses, and he makes one of those out in the woods, and he all the bucks in the area come and use it on his property. He has a very low pressure property though. But I got a question about October lulls and patterning deer. My opinion, I believe that the October lull is a myth. Because at some point deer are out there, whether they're not moving in front of you, they're moving at some point, whether it's nocturnal, if that's the case, all of October should be a lull. But my question to you is during that so-called lull, is there something that you're doing different as opposed to preseason or the rut?
Are you talking hunting-wise?
Yeah, hunting-wise or trying to pattern deer.
It all depends on pressure. I mean, I agree and disagree with you at the same time about the lull being a myth. I think in my experience, in low-pressure situations, there is no lull. The deer feel safe. They're moving. I mean, heck, one of the spots, this is going to make me look like such a spoiled baby. One of the spots, the first week in October, if I don't get hunters up into their trees by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they're too late. They're going to be kicking deer out. Just because we train deer, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to get off on a little bit of a tangent and then try to circle back to you. I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that we train deer just as effectively as we train our dog at home. A cheesy analogy that I use a lot in seminars is go ahead and set out, and obviously don't really do this, but set out a dog dish at home. You stand and fill it up. You keep that thing full 24/7. And from 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, you're standing over that dog dish, and every single time that dog comes to take a bite of food, you kick him in the butt as hard as you can across the room. How long is it going to be before he doesn't start feeding until after 6? It
Right.
can't take them long. That's what we're doing to deer out there. And in my opinion, the lull, for the most part, is actually self-induced. October is a beautiful time to be out in the woods. And everybody and their brother and sister, whether it's going out to just go for a walk, cut some firewood before winter, do some bird hunting, some squirrel hunting, whatever, all of a sudden we've invaded. And I think that, more than anything, causes this lull. It's our own doing. But if we're dealing with high-pressure situations, I'll be honest with you, for the most part, I'm leaving it alone. I want to, in a high-pressure situation, the scenario I talked about, where I'm hunting what it is his core area, but as importantly, it's that area no one else is getting to. I'm going to wait till right around that last week of October, early November, on a good weather day, and I'm going to go in there and try to kill them the very first time because I got virtually no wiggle room for error. In low pressure situations, for the most part, I'm hunting the food, with the exception of I'll be more than happy to spend a couple days hunting the downwind sides of low impact doe bedding areas on good weather days again. By good weather days, I mean at worst it's not overly hot, it's not overly windy. I don't, to be honest with you, I don't pay squat of attention to the moon as far as hunting goes. But perfect. I want that stretch where I'm just going to make up these numbers, but it's mid-70s for the past week. Boom, the bottom falls out. The high for next Thursday is going to be 48 degrees. That's a great, as long as you don't have really stiff winds, that's a great day to be out hunting. Those first couple days right after the bottom falls on the temperatures. That's when I'm going to go in to hunt those doe bedding areas, and the reason I'm going to is because we try so hard to go ahead and put the rut in this neat little 10, 14-day window. As far as breeding goes, it's not. There's some does that come in early, there's some does that come in late, and I'm not talking about being skipped because the buck-doe ratio is so out of whack. I can honestly say I've never seen that happen. And I've hunted some really whacked out ratios. But some does that aren't healthy are naturally going to come in later. Some super healthy does are going to come in early, and then you've got the doe fawns. Even in northern Wisconsin, on a decent year, 5 to 10% of doe fawns are bred their first year. But they have to reach certain physical and physiological thresholds in order to do that, and it takes them longer. They end up coming into estrus later. So I'll actually hunt, I'll try to catch some of that action. I've had pretty good luck with it, hunting doe bedding areas a couple times in mid-October, as long as the weather's cooperating, because Mr. Big, he's a different animal. He knows what's going on out there. I'm not saying he's anywhere near as smart as we try to give him credit for, but he's experienced. He's went ahead and he's seen that, oh, geez, every year there's some early and some late breeding opportunities, and he's driven to perpetuate his species, and he's going to be one of the very first, him and the really stupid young ones, will be the very first deer to be out there looking for does. And every once in a while you can get lucky in mid-October, especially in Wisconsin and Minnesota. I've had real good luck mid-October with a cold front catching Mr. Big checking one of those doe bedding areas.
I think that's some good advice for us to all try out this coming mid-October. I'm sure I'll be thinking through some of these ideas for sure.
Well, the one thing I would say for sure is it better be low impact, because you don't want to blow your best spots before they're good.
Yeah.
You know, that is a very important consideration. And then time it with the weather. I think I already said this, but for me, hunting is all about stacking odds in your favor. And I want those odds stacked, so when I go in there's plenty of stands I've got that are hunted more than once or twice. Okay? But I want to make it so that each time I crawl into that stand, I believe today is as high odds as the stand's going to have for producing for me. And that's worked out really well for me.
So, continuing a few of those thoughts about stacking the odds and using multiple factors to make a decision about a stand site, and kind of tying into what we had talked about just a little bit ago, we talked through how you're specifically using those trail cameras as a tool to better understand what the odds are for a specific time. Can you elaborate a little more on sign? We talked a little bit about tracks, but can you talk about, if at all, you use rub lines or scrapes as part of this overall puzzle?
Rub lines for me are very beneficial in big wood settings, but in more your average Midwestern property, it takes a better mind than me to piece them together. I can count on one hand the number of quote unquote rub lines that what I would consider a rub line in the more Midwestern farm belt settings. You talk about big wood settings, that's a different animal. You don't have the density of mature bucks. So you can tend to piece their rubs together a lot better, but just because a buck is big doesn't mean he's rubbing on big trees. I get every bit as excited by seeing that sapling about the diameter of my index finger or thumb that is absolutely trashed. I mean trashed. There is nothing left to that thing. It's a twisted, up little mess of a tree that stands no chance of survival. I see something like that, and I think odds are pretty good a mature buck did this. Okay. You see that rub that's about the diameter of a pop can, that's got I don't know, let's say 12, 18-inch shine to one side. I got no clue who did that. It might have been Mr. Big. Could have been a yearling buck with a nasty attitude that day, too. And when it comes to the big trees, even on the big trees, I mean, I've seen spikes rub telephone poles.
Wow.
It didn't do a lot of damage to it, but they actually came up to that telephone pole and rubbed its antlers up and down. Even on big trees, I want to see damage. If I see, what I do every time when it comes to rubs, what I do is I walk up to them and look at it and say, do I believe an immature buck could have made this level of, could have trashed the tree to this extent? Now, if I don't believe he could have, that's when I tend to believe it was a mature buck. But the problem I have is so I've got a really good rub over here. I got it's a thigh-sized tree that's shredded. I believe that's a great buck. Okay, now 150 yards to the east, there's a sapling that's absolutely shredded. Okay, I believe that's a good buck. But is it the same one? I can't swear it is. So I use, to me, rubs and scrapes are valuable pieces of intel, especially the size, the tracks and scrapes. That's what I'm really paying attention to when I'm looking at scrapes. But I think we try to make more out of them than they really are. Now, I mean, I've had rub lines in the North Woods where, over a string of 250 yards between the swamp and this clear-cut regrowth, I've got 8 different rubs. And all 8 of them, or 7 out of 8, happen to be pointing back towards that swamp. Okay, that's telling me in this case that I got a good buck. And there's, the trees are pretty trashed. I mean, I believe this is a big one. In that case, I believe that, I've got a good buck bedding in that swamp, and he is using this route predominantly to get to the food, to get to his food source, which is this clear-cut regrowth. It's a clue that they're all pointing back towards the swamp, but because, that's the way he's walking when he comes up to the tree, but then you look down at the tracks and, the majority of tracks are headed towards that clear cut. Okay, I've got enough pieces of intel now to actually believe this is the case. But, I've heard plenty of people talk about how you can tell the direction a buck was going from which direction the rub faces. Now, I've seen an awful lot of bucks circle a tree before they went ahead and made rubs. I've seen a lot of trees that are angled one way or another, or have branches on one location that encourages them to make rubs in a completely different direction. I sat through a seminar. Every time I give seminars, I listen to other speakers. I'm not going to mention his name, but I sat through a seminar last year or 2 years ago that I heard this guy going on about how only mature dominant bucks make rubs in the woods. Immature bucks will go ahead and make them on the edges of fields, but if you find a rub in the middle of the woods, it's guaranteed it was a mature buck. Next, you can go ahead and look at the shine side. That's going to tell you the wind direction for that day. It's the wind was coming exact opposite direction of the shine side of the tree. Okay, meaning that buck is always walking straight into the wind. Now, turn your back to that tree. Now, put the shine side right in the middle of your back. You take 150 paces in that direction, you're going to find his bed. So now, every single time the wind is out of that direction, you know exactly where that buck is bedding. Seriously?
Wow.
And he was selling a $50 book.
Yeesh.
And I'm like, wow, these people know so much more. And then some other guy on TV I heard going on about how there's 3 different categories of rubs. Velvet shedding rubs, they mean nothing. Another category, I'll call them rage rubs, they mean nothing. And then there's the territorial boundary marking rubs, that apparently a mature buck is going to go around his territory every other day and mark trees to scare off all the other bucks.
Was this guy trying to sell you the acorn cruncher too?
I don't know. I turned it off at that point. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, guys. So we try to, I apologize for going way off course here, but we try to put so much more meaning into stuff so often when it comes to mature bucks that are really there. I do have no doubt in my mind that some rubs are made for communication purposes. You tend to see them, they tend to be those ones where you can see the different layers of bark that has just been used year after year after year. And it's kind of like that scenario you were describing earlier about that guy putting in that fake rub out in the woods. That deer are just drawn there naturally to communicate. And sometimes there happens to be a buck over there that he doesn't like, and he's getting all mean and mad, so he's going to trash this tree that he happens to be standing next to right now because he's trying to intimidate that buck. And another time, I believe they do it just for the heck of it. Other times they're doing it to try to, I'm not pretending they consciously think this, but to try to build up their neck muscles. There isn't always, just like, is there always a great reason? I'm sure there is for you too, but for me, there isn't always a slam dunk great reason I do something. Sometimes I do it just for the heck of it, or because I'm bored, or because I wasn't thinking. Why are deer any different?
Yeah. It's a great point. It's something I think you make a very interesting observation that we really do sometimes read a little too much into some of these things and then come to these kind of far off conclusions that can lead us down a wormhole. So a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, well, we try, as I said, there's so much mystique around mature bucks, and we've got so many people in this industry trying to make names for themselves as well. But between the two, we try so desperately hard to put profound meaning to everything, and there really isn't to a lot of stuff. Deer are simple animals. They care about survival and perpetuating their species, and virtually everything in one way, shape, or form revolves around one of those two things.
So true. So true. So this perfectly segues into my final question for you, Steve, because we are coming up on here on time. I'm curious, and maybe you've already mentioned it, but what do you believe the biggest mistake is that hunters make when thinking about patterning deer or when trying to pattern deer? What is that big mistake?
I would try to, my knee-jerk is to say trying to get too much intel. You should never, whether it's, as I mentioned, about using scouting cams or getting out there scouting itself, the trick to pulling this stuff off is to be able to get enough information to make an educated guess, but not ruining your area in doing so. If you're going out there every single, even if you got it in low impact locations, going out there every single day to swap chips on your camera is not a good idea. I know because I used to. It was just like, I get the draw. It feels like you're a kid on Christmas Day. You can't wait to get those pictures and check them. But to answer a question that I didn't earlier, generally, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, 2 weeks to a month between chip swaps is how much time I give them. There will be exceptions. Let's say I swapped chips last week, and the owners are coming down now this week to hunt. Well, I probably will go out there and swap them right then and there, so I have the most up-to-date intel on where I should send them and stuff. But But don't trash the place. Remember, somebody years and years ago, I apologize, I can't remember who told me this, and they deserve credit for it because it was one of the more profound things I think I've ever heard. You can go ahead and take your woods and you can divide it into two sections. One you own, the other part the deer owns. You guys aren't going to share well. Give the deer as much as you can give them, and you will see more deer over the long run. It's when you sit there and continually kick that dog in the butt every time it comes up to the food bowl. That's when all of a sudden your deer sightings, they start going down. So just use your head about this stuff. The other thing is common sense is your best friend. Nothing when it comes to whitetails, the more you think about it, nothing is overly profound. If it does not make sense to you, you know what, it probably ain't happening. So somebody's probably trying to sell you a bill of goods for one reason or another. Use common sense, use your mind. Your best weapon by far is your mind and its power to analyze situations. Get the pieces you can safely, and then try to connect them. It's like, okay, I get his picture on this food plot here. I get his picture in this meadow over here. I get his picture on this clear-cut regrowth over there. Okay. Where's he coming from? Well, each time, if I look at how he's entering the frame, he appears to be coming from the same general area. There's a ridge in that same general area there. You know what? If he beds on the knob of that ridge, he can use his eyes to scan the entire valley below him for just shy of 360 degrees. And if he's got a wind coming down that ridge, that wind's covering his backside. I bet you that's where he's bedding. Now, how is he getting between those locations? I can't tell you how he's getting to the meadow or the clear cut, but there is that nasty ditch that separates him from that point, that runs between that point and that food plot. There happens that ditch is just a major pain to cross, except for that one spot where it's got that low sloping gentle bank. And I bet you I can set up there, and I bet you I can kill that deer. That's the type of thought process I try to go through every situation. He might be real tough to kill off that meadow. He might be real tough to kill off that clear cut. But that one spot over there, he's vulnerable. And just playing the odds, 2 out of 3 times he's not going to be going through there. But if I can get in and out of that location safely, if I use my head on the wind, as long as I make it so he doesn't know I'm hunting him there, you know what? 1 out of 3 ain't bad odds. That means I sit here 3 times, and odds are in my favor. One of those times he's going to come through, and I'm going to have a chance to kill him.
This is I love this mindset of how you're using those different pieces and then looking at the overall situation from a higher level and finding out where that weakness is. I think that's a great way to think through what can sometimes be an overwhelming amount of data. I think when a lot of hunters look at, they've got all these pictures, they've got all these observations, they've seen all these different pieces of sign. And I think, personally, I've felt this at times, there's information overload. And because you're so overwhelmed, you then don't do anything smart with that data. When really you need to narrow it down, take a look at it smartly, find out where that one piece of data that you can take action on is, and then focus your efforts there.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if 90% of your data you can't capitalize on, if you can find that 10%. Mm-hmm. For me, it's, like I said, all about stacking odds and looking for that one kink in his armor. I can't do anything effectively. As a matter of fact, if I try to hunt him on that clear cut, you know what? Without having enough intel and knowing he's hitting that after dark, why am I hunting there? What can I get from that stand? He's not coming until after dark. All I can do is let him know, hey, dummy, I'm over here. I'm trying to kill you.
Right.
And I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that we educate far more deer from the odors we leave in the woods after we're gone than we ever do while we're in it. So look for that weakness. And man, I cannot stress enough. When you go into, I have two classifications of stands that I hunt. I have what I consider fun stands, and I have buck stands. Now, I'm not saying I can't kill a buck off of a fun stand, but this is a stand where, it's real low impact. I can hunt the snot out of it. When I want to go out and shoot a doe, or I want to go out, but the odds aren't in my favor of killing a buck, I'm going to go to one of these because I'm going to minimize my disturbances, the damage that I do to this place. Okay. When I go to hunt a buck stand, I have a reason I believe I'm going to kill that buck there that day. And I am not going to climb up in that stand until that happens. Now that might be the phase of the season. It's like, okay, we're looking at that first week of November right now. The bucks are running around like crazy. This is a good funnel between two doe bedding areas. Man, now's my time to go in. Or it may be I'm getting pictures of him on that food plot. It's a half hour after dark, but I bet you 100 yards back in the woods at that crossing between that point and that food plot, I can catch him. Give yourself a reason to believe you are going to kill a buck out of your buck stands when you go in, and taking that approach has done amazing things to my success rates.
This is awesome. I think you have just dropped an absolute wealth of information and wisdom on us, Steve. And I personally would love to keep talking with you for probably another 2 hours, but we are coming up on time here. So, Steve, I want to thank you so much for spending the last hour with us and really sharing all this really interesting, your different opinions and ideas on all this about patterning mature deer. And I'm going to be sure to be taking notes on this when I listen to it again. I think a lot of our listeners have too. So thank you, Steve, for your time.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. If anybody needs to be thanking anybody, it's me thanking you and your listeners. Because you guys read the magazines I write for, because you've accidentally watched one of the tips I've given, because you went to I get to live my dream job, and I could not possibly do it without all you people. Impossible, and I will forever be grateful for that. So trust me when I say it's the least I can do, and my absolute pleasure.
Well, it's the same goes both ways, Stephen, and good luck this season, and hopefully we can hear from you again soon later down the road on the podcast, and we'll be hearing about your success this fall.
Sounds good. Make sure you send me some pictures of the slobs you killed this year.
Hey, that sounds like a good plan. We'll talk to you then, Steve.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Well, I don't know about you, but my mind is racing a little bit right now. There was so much great information packed in that last hour. Now I just need to figure out a way to store it all up and remember. But I hope that you guys found this episode equally as helpful too. And as always, if you find the time, it'd be great if you could leave us a rating or review on iTunes. It would be greatly appreciated. Speaking of appreciation, we'd of course like to thank our partners who help make this show possible. Big thanks to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Carbon Express Arrows, Hunt Soft, Lacrosse Boots, Big & J Long Range Attractants, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. Finally, be sure to visit wiredtohunt.com/episode 22 to view the show notes and links from today's episode. That said, thank you so much for being here with us today on the Wired to Hunt podcast. Until next week, stay wired to hunt.